Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ash. I'm a member of the Firestorm Collective, and I'm pretty excited to be hosting tonight's conversation between Leigh Cowart and Davey Davis about the release of Leigh's new book, Hurt So Good, The Science and Culture of Pain on Purpose. Before we dive in, and for folks joining an event with us for the first time, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a 13-year-old worker-owned cooperative and radical bookstore in so-called Asheville, North Carolina, on occupied Cherokee territory. We're a general interest bookstore, but are perhaps more widely known for our eclectic selection of titles related to feminism, queerness, social movements, and radical politics. If you're not local and haven't had a chance to check us out in person, our entire catalog is available for purchase on our website, and we ship all across the country. So if you haven't checked us out yet, I highly encourage that you do, and I will drop links to the website in the chat. Firestorm is also a community event space where we host all kinds of workshops, screenings, discussions, and reading groups. However, since the start of the pandemic, we've transitioned entirely to an online virtual space and will continue hosting virtual events like the one you are attending tonight until it is otherwise safe to do so. We are currently hosting a book club on Tuesday nights for Modibo Kadali's Pan-African Social Ecology. And we have another author event coming up at the end of the month on October 29th with Indigenous scholar Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. So if you're interested in staying informed about those events or any other events happening at Firestorm, I'll also drop a link to our community calendar in the chat. A note for those of you who are attending through Zoom, there will be time at the end of tonight's conversation for audience Q&A. So for anyone interested in asking a question, I'll encourage you to submit questions throughout the discussion by using the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen, and our speakers will do their best to respond. Okay, yeah, like I said, tonight's event features a discussion between Leigh Cowart and Davey Davis about the release of Leigh's new book, Hurt So Good, The Science and Culture of Pain on Purpose. In the book, Cowart leads readers through an exploration of why people all over the world love to engage in pain on purpose. As a researcher, science writer, and self-identified masochist, they have some questions to ask. Why do people engage in masochism? What are the benefits, social, psychological, physiological, and otherwise? What are the costs? What does masochism have to say about the human experience? By participating in many of these experiences themselves and through conversations with psychologists, fellow scientists, and people who seek pain for pleasure, Cowart unveils how our minds and bodies are engineered to find meaning and relief in pain, a quirk in our programming that drives discipline and innovation, even as it threatens to swallow us whole. At its core, the book is an appropriately tender, sometimes hilarious, and often heartfelt exploration of why so many of us want to experience pain to feel good. You can pick up a copy for yourself, you can send it to someone who needs it, or you can pick one up to read with a friend or lover because it's that kind of book. But whatever you want to do, if you've not had a chance to check it out yet, I really hope that you do. And for those interested, I will also drop links in the chat to the book. As for our panelists tonight, Leigh Cowart is a researcher and journalist whose work has appeared in the Washington Post, New York Magazine, Buzzfeed, Vice, and other outlets. Before becoming a journalist, Cowart was immersed in academia, doing research on subjects like sexual dimorphism in leaf-nosed bats and resource allocation in flowers. They live in Asheville, North Carolina. Davey Davis is a Brooklyn-based critic and novelist. Their first novel, The Earthquake Room, is available through our website, and I will link to it in the chat. And their second novel, X, will be available through Catapult next year. They write a weekly newsletter about art, culture, sexuality, and popular queer discourse at itsdavid.substack.com. So Leigh, Davey, thank you so much for being here with us tonight and taking the time to share your stories and insights with us. And with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Leigh.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. Davey, thank you for joining me. This is really exciting. I love your book and I love Firestorm, so I'm very happy.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm like so excited to be here. I've been waiting to talk to you.
Yeah, so tell me, what was your, I'm just going to jump right in and ask you what you thought about the book.
Oh my God, that's a great question because the answer is so complicated. And I think that really is well suited for such like a complicated book. Like, I would say probably the first thing that I love about it is how ambitious it is. I mean, it's a combination of all of these genres, right? There's a little bit of memoir, there's scientific research, there's reportage, there's you know, like these profiles of all of these different kinds of people who enjoy pain for pleasure. And I feel like this, you know, there is one way to approach this like study of pain, which is to be really granular. And that's kind of like a lot of the people that you survey, like scientists and psychologists. But another approach would be this like more holistic, like open kind of take that you have done. And I thought that was really, really cool. Like, and I think also, as I'm sure you can attest, it's really easy to kind of look at masochism and people who are masochists as like one-dimensional or like, you know, like a freak show, and in not a positive sense of that term. But actually there are so many different layers. There is so much to know and learn from all of these different angles. So yeah, that's what I liked about that book. It was like, let's look at this holistically because it's actually a very, very complicated thing.
Oh, thank you. I love that you said that because one of the biggest criticisms I get on this work is that I do not give an easy answer. And I think if you are coming to the book with the desire to really understand like a masochist, like an image of one person and an understanding of this one kind of aspect of masochism, the reality, I mean, there is no one answer. And I think the book lays it out and demonstrates that this is actually a very human and complicated thing. Like you can't really extricate your experience of a thing from the way you conceive of it. And I have found that a lot of people do not want to be lumped in with the other people they consider to be masochists. And
I mean, you're like working against this whole long history, at least, you know, going back to like the 19th century, like you talk about in the book, of like the medicalized sexual masochist, which is like one version of it. And so you're working against, I mean, stigma is a strong word, but I feel like that's definitely a word that you can use while you're trying to fold in all of these other experiences. And a lot of those experiences are resisting being folded in. So you're like, it's like push and pull, you know, it's a big, tall order.
You know, I think a lot about that. It's interesting. I decided to use the word masochism to describe this, like consenting to pain, because it has bled over into colloquial use. Like people refer to grad students as masochists, or like, you know, nail biters or hot sauce pepperheads. And so like the word is now in circulation in a way that like it wasn't in the 1800s when Krafft Ebing named it after a former colleague of his, Leopold Sacher-Masoch, who did not know that he was going to be the namesake for this paraphilia. It was actually pretty cold-blooded what Kraft Ebing did to him, because at the time, you know, Sacher-Masoch was a very popular novelist. He wrote Venus in Furs and people loved it. And then it came out that it was actually like grounded in reality, that those were his particular sexual fetishes, and it ruined him. And I mean, he had other shit going on. Let's be honest. He was not a great guy. Like, I'm not trying to make this man into a saint. He was also, he had some shit going on, which I get into in the book. But like the idea that all of our squeamishness around, like American squeamishness around the word masochism has to do with like this one guy's boner at one point. But even despite that, we've taken that word and used it for all kinds of things. So my thinking was, if this word is already being used in this way to describe everyone from ballet dancers to ice water swimmers, let's just use it. Let's let that be the word and not reinvent the wheel. And turns out that when you tell an MMA gym full of dudes in Nashville, Tennessee, that you're writing a book about masochism and that's why you're there, they get very upset with you. Because it challenges their preconceived notions of masculinity and heterosexuality and submission and dominance. But I stand by it. I stand by my use of that word.
That's interesting too, because I feel like for a lot of people that resistance or that sense of it is being coded along the lines of desire and sexuality and gender and all these other things. It seems kind of like unspoken or like kind of uninvestigated by, like the response is knee jerk. Right. Imagine like for people who are like, whoa, wait a minute. I just like getting punched in the face multiple times a week. I'm not a masochist. You know, like I wonder if when you were talking to all these people, once you kind of explained your position, were they more open to it? Were you able to change people's minds or perspectives about that?
Some people for sure. Some people were like, oh, I didn't really think I was a masochist, but when you put it that way, they're like, I definitely see that in me, and I see that in this culture, and I see how pervasive it is. But they have to be willing to listen and to like take that leap. Something that has come up, there's a lot of push. I consider ultramarathoners to be masochists. You know, running until you physically black out seems like a masochistic endeavor to me. If the point of what you were doing is to overcome suffering or to suffer for as long as you can, I feel like that's very classical, consenting to pain for some larger purpose to get something out of it. And something people ask is like, well, what about people who just like pain? Like they try to distinguish between like athletes and people who quote just like pain. And I think that's really interesting, because if you ask that question about something like ice cream, if you're like, I just love ice cream for the fact of it, you're like, okay, well, let's unpack that a little bit. Every time you have ice cream, you have the memories of all the other times you have it. You have the biochemical like activation from the sugar and the fat and the pleasure of eating it. You are experiencing the ice cream with all of the emotional context that you bring to it and your own experiences and your own desires. And I just don't think it's reasonable to try to talk about something absent your physical reaction to it. Like we're always using our bodies. So to say that someone just likes pain because of the pain, what does that mean? Like outside of the way their body responds to it, outside of their desire for it. And I think that's a really interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of mirrors that the more drilled down question that we kind of have if you're thinking about pain and the experience of pain, and particularly for people who maybe have like a sexual interest in pain, the difference, but you're like, okay, well, and you refer to it a lot in the book where, okay, well, there's people who like getting their ass beat because afterwards you get high, like high as a motherfucker. But then you're like, what about the people who just, you kind of start trying to get down to people who just like it for its own sake. And then you kind of realize you don't even really know what that means. Like one, you're like, what is pain? what is the experience of pain without the physiological results that happen afterward? Like for the vast majority of us, there isn't one. Like you cannot kind of separate those things. You can definitely, dive deeper and kind of start picking things apart and putting names on things and like really exploring unpack what that means. But I wonder if there is an end to it, and I kind of suspect that there isn't. I hope that there isn't. It's more interesting.
Yeah, I don't think there is. I mean, knowing how the brain creates the experience of pain and how it's always subjective. Like every time there's no like test or machine that they can put you in that can accurately quantify your experience of the pain. And it's not a one-to-one with the sensation that of like the neural input that you're experiencing. It has to do with like emotional state. Where are you? What are you expecting to happen? Have you been in this situation before? There is that story at the beginning of the book about the researcher who was hiking in the brush. And I love this because it just absolutely drives home how very, very subjective our experience of pain is. So he was hiking and he felt something brush his leg, and his brain just kind of goes through the checklist. Like, you've been touched on the outside of your leg. Where are we? We're hiking. Does this happen when we hike? Yes. Was it probably a stick? Yes. Are we probably fine? Yes. And then like a few minutes later, he collapses because he was actually bitten by an eastern brown snake, one of the most venomous snakes in the world. He survives his ordeal and goes hiking again. And this time he feels a sensation on the outside of his leg, and his brain basically goes, oh, fuck, and drops his ass, just like drops him. 10 out of 10 pain, absolutely excruciating, like cannot overcome it. And it was a stick. That was actually the scratch. But because your brain is just always trying to, protect you and figure out what's going on outside of your skull where it's trapped, it gave him 10 out of 10 pain because the brain thought that's what he needed to be safe. And I think once you start to understand pain in that way, it becomes a lot harder to answer the question of what about people who just like pain for pain? Because like, what does that even mean? How would you divorce that from experience and expectation?
Yeah. Well, and then you going back to that bowl of ice cream, right? Like your first bite of ice cream in your entire life for most people is like, you don't even remember it, but your first like sweet experience is like when you watch kids have that experience. It's like their whole body is just like engaged. It's like, wow, what is this? And that's going to be part of the context that informs their ice cream eating experience for the rest of their life. But then you're like, well, what happens when you like a pain experience like that where you misunderstood it or your body misinterpreted it? Like that goes kind of into your into your catalog of experiences. And so there isn't even really like a straightforward entry into pain, the same as with pleasure, I feel like. And also, dialing back even more, like for me, you can't talk about a pain experience, like a significant pain experience, like getting bitten by one of those snakes, without also talking about what it means to feel good and what it means to feel pleasure, because these things are happening alongside of each other. I mean, and I said it in the review that I wrote of your book, I wish that we could have this book in like a Encyclopedia Britannica, like selection of like a book on pleasure, like all of these different like affective like experiences are all in conversation. And it's, you're only one person, but you can't even really talk about pain without also talking about pleasure or absence of, numbness. And, I don't know, like it turns into this thing where you can kind of keep drilling down, but you could also keep zooming out, which is also, in you, there is so much. I can't emphasize enough for anyone else who has not yet read the book, but there are so many different perspectives and experiences in the book. And it's not just, your life, like it's hilarious how we're going through and all of a sudden you're in Costa Rica, like studying bats, or you're a ballerina, or like your life on its own is already really interesting. Like you have all of these anecdotes and stories and really like disparate experiences that really enrich it. And then but bringing in all of these other people, it turns into like this like pastiche of that I think really more adequately kind of conveys like the diversity of these experiences in our own like individual bodies and across bodies that I don't think that you could get otherwise.
Yeah, that was very intentional.
Yeah.
I'm so, so like Elaine Scarry writes about how pain is kind of prelingual. And, it's like one of those bodily sensations that it's very hard to accurately convey to someone else exactly what you're feeling. This is true of most bodily sensations, right? But it's something that is felt before described. It's so intimate, it's so personal. And so to try to explain your pain or your pleasure or the way your eczema feels or anything becomes an exercise in trying to find the middle ground with someone else. And what I didn't want to do was talk to all these people about their masochism or their pain and their pleasure, and then rewrite their experience of it through my lens of what I thought they meant. So there are a lot of people describing their own experiences in the book that I didn't rewrite in my own words, or like, or kind of polish to match my style. And I got some pushback on that from, not so much from my publisher, but as it started to get read, the idea that it felt disjointed because there were so many other voices in the book. But I was just like, I'm really stubborn. I was like, no, that is very much what I want. I want people to hear how many different ways, I want people to hear different ways of talking about pain and what pain means to people in their own words, and how we can kind of create an encyclopedia of experience and see where there's overlap, and see where we can find spaces where we understand each other and can be curious about ourselves in the context of what is possible.
Well, yeah, and it strikes me, I mean, for me, as I'm writing and thinking about like my things that I'm interested in, like pain, pleasure, and desire, and the way that all of these things come together, like I feel as if part of the difficulty of both writing and thinking about and communicating about these things is that I think for a lot of us, especially like in the Western world, there is this, mind-body disconnect, right? Or this desire, and this goes back to like this history of the creation of the paraphilia and the medicalization and criminalization of like deviant sexualities and deviant pleasures. But when you are intellectualizing something that is so very embodied, whether it's pain or pleasure or hunger or sexual desire or what have you, you're not able to see the entirety of the experience, and you are trying to articulate something that might be impossible to clearly articulate, but is less articulable without like this other element, right? Like the like sensual like meaty element of that, and so I think that it was a good choice on your part. I mean, and then there's also, reading this, I mean, I was definitely really fascinated by the, quote unquote experts that you brought in. Like, I don't know a lot of the science, and I felt like I learned a lot on that end, but I was also just like, and this is just my personal interest in people's like pervert aha moments, but I was like, I just want a whole book, or I want all the notes that Leigh has with all of these people, just like compiled, just hearing everything that all of the, like a longitudinal study of these people's like experiences. But
it was really fun to research this book. It was this is all the book behind me.
For the people, the lay people that you spoke to, were these all people that you knew already? Did you put out a call? How did you track down those voices?
Both. Yeah. I did a lot of both. And I really wound up with I probably used about 10% of the interviews in the book. I mean, I talked to so many people, and it was really hard not to just make an actual encyclopedia of experience and actually turn it into a popular science book. But yeah, I mean, I talked, so I was working as a bouncer at a bar when I was working on this book, because I'm very short and it's very confusing if I throw you out, because it's like being herded by a corgi. So but it's great. So I was talking to lots of people at work. Every time when I did about half the reporting prior to the pandemic. And so when I would get out, I would just talk to people about it. People like, what are you working on? Why are you here? I put out a call on Twitter. I did a lot of Google surveys where I just invited anyone who was interested in sharing their experience could answer 4 to 6 questions, and I'd get in touch. I talked to everyone I know about it, and it was great. I mean, for something that really does have such a strong stigma, it seems like, especially now that the book is out and I'm really seeing, responses that aren't in my immediate circle. Some people really get it and love it, and they're like, I need this book. And other people are like, masochism? They're uncomfortable with me even using the word or saying that I'm a masochist. It's just so it's really, and yet it's still it's so common. Most people have a masochistic facet of their hobbies or their desires. And, even Kinsey found that half of people surveyed like to be bitten during sex. It's not weird. It's pretty normal. Our bodies are these wet electric playgrounds, and we can feel so many different kinds of sensation. And what we experience is so shaped by our expectations and desire for it that, it makes sense that people would venture into the part of the playground that made them feel different things, excited or resilient or aroused. And the payoff, there's the pain, and then there's all of the biochemical slurry of homebrew drugs that come into play when there's the kind of nociceptive input. And I just think that's neat. That's my favorite.
Then you run into these people who have, not only these MMA guys with an investment in their own identity being distinct from that, but then if you're talking about normal things that normal people do that endanger your body and feel terrible and can be traumatizing, like childbirth. If you come after an institution like that, and you're actually, for some people, if you think about it, a lot of people look at childbirth as, a challenge, or they enjoy, we talk about all of these hormones that are released after you give birth, like oxytocin, and it feels so amazing and wonderful. And I'm not saying that's the only reason why people decide to, carry babies and give birth, but when you start applying that lens to all these other things, people get really stressed out by it. They're like, whoa, I'm not a pervert. I chose to put myself through one of the hardest things. And, you have a child, so I'm sure that was definitely on your mind while you were writing it.
Yeah. People, so I'm a pervert, and I'm fine with that. I know what I am, and it's true. I'm a big pervert, and but I'm also really willing to some people recoil from it because they don't want the label, or they think that masochism always entails perversion or whatever. I've found that there are ways to approach it that make people feel less of that pearl clutching American puritanical recoil reflex. And actually, a hot sauce is the end. you can get people to kind of understand masochism and consent and opting into suffering for a reward or for a challenge or for fun, there are many reasons to do it, but people are like, oh, hot sauce isn't perverted. Okay, well, maybe I see your point, you know.
No, that's, you're like, listen, let's just start small, like with something that's probably in your fridge right now that you're like on your hot dog or whatever.
Right. So on that note, I am going to do a reading from the book. And it is from a chapter called Lava Mouth. And I guess to preface it, I will just say that for this book, I ate the hottest pepper in the world, which is the Carolina Reaper pepper. And if you're, it's like, it feels like fighting God. It's like, it is wild. I later grew them and then ate the ones that I grew, but I'm going to read an excerpt from Lava Mouth that is about eating the world's hottest pepper. Like a dog unsure whether they're really allowed the treat on offer, I open my mouth, bring the pepper to my teeth, bulk, pull back, then go in for it. I bite almost the entirety of the pepper off and begin to chew, returning to nibble the rest of its red flesh from its rough green calyx. Prior to eating the pepper, I decided that I was going to chew and spit it, lest I endure the capsaicin cramps on my red-eye flight back to the East Coast. Even in my most adventurous state of mind, the idea of enduring 6 hours of paralytic intestinal cramps while trapped in an airborne shitbox was too much for me. The world's most ferocious pepper-eating competitors took steps to avoid the cap cramps, and I decided that I would too. However, the decision to spit the pepper out meant that I was doomed to overcompensate elsewhere. I mean, it's only fair, right? And I, stubborn, overly confident idiot that I was on that 90-degree day in sunny Auburn, California, decided to atone for my plans to spit by absolutely liquefying the pepper with my big fat molars. Sitting in the car, stomach pressed urgently up against my pyloric sphincter, lungs protesting the mere vapors of this fresh horror unfolding in my oral cavity, the thought occurs that I might be chewing the pepper too much. They taste good, I chirp into the camera, every ounce the brown-nosing teacher's pet I've always been, red soup sloshing through my mouth like Dante's gazpacho. The pepper tastes good for about a half a second, but then it does not taste good. In the beginning, it was sweet and sharp and almost delicate, but then it turned into something else entirely, and now I am having a very strong feeling about it. Telling the camera that the pepper tastes good is mostly magical thinking, something I'd heard other pepperheads say as if proving that their mastery over heat allowed them the godlike powers of appreciating the finer tasting notes of fucking lava. I spit the pepper onto the ground and closed the car door with a dramatic exhale, and then burst out in riotous laughter, cackling in the face of my obvious mistake. A gasp catches hold of me and hot pepper spit hits the back of my throat. An ominous coughing fit erupts immediately, and my first thought is a very quiet, very stern, very unambiguous, oh shit. There is a siren in my body and it's coming from my mouth. And I know in my heart of hearts, because I did my research, because everyone has told me this, because the sensation is already escalating fast, I know that the pain is only beginning. Laughter turns to ice cold concern and I get serious immediately. I lean out the side of my car and silently retch hard, spraying saliva onto the fist-sized blot of crushed pepper seeds and vermilion ooze that sits atop the baked dust parking lot. I close the door and I take my glasses off, which I should not have done. And I wipe pepper spit from my face with my bare fingers. This is foreshadowing. And I clamber again for the door handle, I lean urgently over the ground, abdominal muscles clenching in revolt as molten hot spit streams from under my tongue and behind my teeth as if a dam inside me has broken. I sit back in the car and try to take an accounting of my situation. I have never felt regret so clear, so unquestioned, or so sudden. The camera is still rolling and I try to remain calm, but I know that any pretense to decorum is over, confident in the knowledge that the thing this pepper is about to do to me is going to be unfathomable because empirically it already is. And we're just getting started. I scramble for the cold water I brought along, because fuck this ride, fuck staying on this ride, fuck this feeling in my mouth. I breathe and a dribble of wicked spit hits the back of my throat and my lungs contract in a cough that feels like a threat and a wheeze and a desperate plea for, oh my God, none of this, please. No. My intentions were to talk to the camera through the whole ride, but it rapidly becomes patently clear that that's not fucking gonna happen. I start to squat in my seat like some kind of weeping gremlin, drawing my feet up under me in a desperate plea to what? To move away from my mouth? My mouth, which feels like actually is literally full of coals. I mean, that's not an exaggeration, and yet it gets worse. I perch a crying gargoyle, snot everywhere. Water isn't helping, so I take a sip of hot, flat kombucha that's been baking in the car all day. This somehow makes the pain worse and full of needles, and I shake my head immediately as if I could dislodge the experience before it embeds as a memory. Despite having ardently sworn to avoid this very act, I take my fingers and I put them directly and fully into my eye. I do not realize what I have done. It is true slapstick, the earnest performance of a previously considered bad decision. I told myself not to do that, and the second I wanted to, I did it anyway. Because of this, my left eye and its surrounding area learns to speak a whole new language, composed solely of ways to say fuck you as loudly as possible, as quickly as possible, without ceasing. The heat in my mouth is climbing, and everything in my face is screaming. I start doing Lamaze breathing. I am coming unraveled. I take a sip of cold water and it brings the horrible heat into my throat, but does nothing. I take another sip. I mean, a different bad sensation is better than the same bad sensation, I reason, because I would do anything to get away from the literal portal to hell unfolding in my mouth. I mean, anything. Please just come here and punch me in the face so hard that when I wake up, this is over. How will I describe this? My idiot brain wails, screaming like an infant. I begin to rock my body back and forth. I am lost in this heat pouring through my mouth and down my throat. I try to breathe, try to think, but I can't. I am losing to this. I am losing myself here. I am slipping. I try to talk to the camera, but I can't. Try to make sure my face is in the frame, but why? I am sliding out of the reality that contains this camera, this parking lot attendant, reasonable social decorum. My eyes glaze into the distance. After retreating to inner space with eyes closed, fingers pressed, I feel it coming. It's getting worse. And I start this quiet, deliberate bargaining with myself as if I could think my way out of this. This will end. Just breathe through it. If you've given birth before, that took longer than this. This will end. The sensation feels unsurvivable. It feels scary and dangerous and infinite. I know that this whole ordeal will only take about 40 minutes and then it'll be over. But I am only 5 minutes in and writing out the rest of this seems unimaginable. The pain is getting bad and I lie down. I think about it. I think about myself. I think about the pain and I think about the fire and I think about my options. And so at some point, I decide to do what I came here to do. You can see this moment in the video, this eerie transition. I cough and I settle. My mouth curls slightly into a deranged smile and I say it out loud. All right. And so it begins. It is my humble opinion that in a case like this, at some point, you just have to decide to really fucking take the ride. On the video, I am leaving for somewhere else, panting, eyes cloudy. I have all the equipment I need to get through this, and I know it in my bones. There is an interiority that comes during pain, a way to burrow into the body, mind, same thing. I breathe deep and hard into myself this moment. My lizard brain, my supportive body, my sturdy self. Ultra runner Courtney Dalwater has a phrase that describes the way she suffers during the hundreds of miles she runs. She calls it the pain cave. I like this image. Pain creates walls, a container of sorts, sealing you off from the world. But there is an opening to that cave, a light in that fucking tunnel, and it's coming. Moving my body feels good, the rocking motion focusing my mind on the task at hand. The task, you see, is simply to wait it out. I am here to ride this fucking idiot ride I got on and see it to the end. Bold choice, as it's not getting better. In fact, the pain has been getting steadily worse, but you know what? This is where I am, and I am going to fucking reckon with it. By the end of this, it will have taken the 40 minutes I was promised. I squat in the car again, rising into myself. Spit runs freely from my mouth onto the leather seats, and I am crawling out of this pain cave by making myself a home within it like an uninvited guest. I breathe into the fire in my mouth and I think about it. I focus my brain on how it feels inside my chest and my pelvis, what my shoulders are doing. I think about my mouth and I think about nothing at all. And I think about that guy who free climbed 900-meter El Capitan without a rope and how I get scared on the kids' climbing wall at the trampoline park. I think about how I wish my partner was here. I think about the word no, but on fire. And I think about how the world is ending and I have a fucking plastic bottle in a rental car and I feel a wave of spit crest my lip and I notice my mouth and finally I rush into it. I'm dissolving into myself, this pepper, my face. I want out and I want through. My eye is bright red and shrieking, and that's not even the worst thing happening to my body. I know this is fucking fake. I know it. I know it. I know it. I know that I'm not in danger and that this pepper will cause me no harm. And yet none of that matters because I am at the mercy of the electric tofu between my ears. So with that, I surrender and I am gone into the fire. I clench my fists and I pant and I snarl and I root down to the base of the screaming in my mouth. I bear down and I take it and I take it and I like it and I start to fucking smile because I know in this moment, I know that I'm going to fucking ride this monster all the way to the end. It's my fucking monster and this is my fucking party. And moments later, when it starts in the part of my stomach where butterflies are felt, that exact spot. It comes and it surges through my body too fast. It knocks me stupid and I scream and I crumple into my seat, sliding back and clutching my chest. It feels like a hot bath, good drugs, the color pink, but also the color red, having a nosebleed directly onto a puppy, coming to after fainting and being electrocuted with a cattle prod, but in a good way. It feels like all of these things at the same time. And I rub my throat and I ready myself to accept the true gift of the Carolina Reaper pepper. My body's pain response floods my system and I am on fire and I am fucking incapacitated with joy. I laugh and shriek and shake my head back and forth hard enough to rattle my teeth. I writhe and shiver and thrash about. I soak this up like a sponge and I wring it into my mouth and I gargle it with relish. I am elated, victorious, lost miles from the cave, alone in the stratosphere. I fully feel like I am rolling and I wiggle in my seat, unable to conceal my joy with stillness. It is rapturous. The pleasure comes in cresting waves, and I stand in the surf and I let them crash into my triumphant body. My breathing slows. I wallow into myself, lingering in the animal recesses of my body. Skin damp, hair matted, lips swollen. I rest my body in it. And when I'm finished, I climb back out of the clouds and into the dusty parking lot. And I am happy.
I've never been interested in experimenting with that kind of sensation, but you've got me rethinking it. I mean, like, you totally convey how fucking gnarly the first part is, but then afterward, when like all of the endorphins hit, you're like, you know, they could be onto something.
I was not a pepperhead before this book. This was not one of my things.
You doing your due diligence.
Yeah, but now I am. But I mean, kind of. I'm not as hardcore. I like to do it for fun. I'm not like the everyday pepper people, but I wasn't even gonna do it. When I pitched this book and was thinking about this chapter, I was like, I think I'll lick one. I'll lick a Reaper pepper. My partner was like, "You'll lick a pepper? Really? You don't want to eat it?" They were right though. And it's fun. So I thought that, so now I'm going to bring this up. My publisher partnered with Puckerbutt Farms, the home of the Carolina Reaper pepper, to make a Reaper pepper hot sauce as part of book promotion. And I have a little spit cup, and I thought it would be fun to do the rest of this and do some questions and maybe talk a little more about capsaicin after swishing some. How do you feel about that, Davey?
I'm only disappointed I don't also have some, so I can do it with you.
I will send you a bottle.
I would love some.
Okay, I'll send you a bottle. I have a stash. So as a thank you for doing this with me, I'll send it to you. And this is just pureed Reaper pepper and a little vinegar. So but it's fun. So now that we've read about what it's like, I'm just gonna have a little sippy sip, and then we're gonna talk more about pain. You want to count me down?
Yeah, I'll give you a 5 count. Do it on 1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh yeah. You okay?
Yeah.
Do you want
Great.
Do you want me to read the first question to distract you from the experience? Okay, all right. That's kind of long, so I'll get into it. This one is from Chad. I have completed 75% of the audiobook. It's an incredible work and incredibly liberating. I greatly appreciate the chapter on harm versus pain and the early caveat about the importance of consent. I would love to know Leigh's view on the boundaries of consent, given how much of a role group dynamics and even social expectations play in whether someone truly wants to do something versus feeling like they must do it due to constructs of masculinity or wanting to be accepted, etc. Did you follow the question? It was kind of long. All right. All right.
That's a great question.
It's a great question.
Because if you're being pressured into doing something, is it consent? It's not really consent at that point, right? And it's hard because, like, for example, I grew up in ballet, started when I was 4, arguably consented to do 20 years of ballet, but like, did I? I was a child. going forward, there's so many societal expectations of, masculinity, but also like being with the group. There's some research.
You're doing great. You're doing
There is some research that shows that being in a group, it can increase your pain tolerance, but it also makes you more likely to go with the group. And I think that's such a great question to be aware of when you start to examine your own desires and also the desires and motivations of the people that you play with. The more direct and honest communication we can have around what we want, how we want it, the better off we are, I think. And one of my goals.
I'm not a sadist, but this is fun.
One of my goals in writing this book is to make people feel more willing to be curious and maybe feel a little less shame about what they find about themselves and their fellow man. So my lips just like feel like bees, wasps have been here. I got some on the outside of my mouth and I'm just like, no, it's, so yeah, the more honest we can be with ourselves and the factors in play, the better suited we are to make good decisions for ourselves regarding our bodily integrity and how to act on our desires.
It's a great answer to a great question. There's two questions so far. So this next question is actually kind of in that same vein. It's from, well, I actually won't include this person's name in case they want it to be anonymous, but it says, I'm a survivor of CSA who is a submissive / into BDSM. I haven't read all your book yet. It's on the way. And I read a chapter on LitHub, but I'm curious if you address the way trauma survivors engage in BDSM, but in a way that resists pathology.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Multiple times in the book. Context creates a container. Context and consent creates a container in which you can experience and recontextualize things that have maybe felt insurmountable or have a hold. Very clear to say that BDSM is not therapy, but it can be therapeutic for some people. For instance, I have a lot of medical trauma and I'm really scared of needles. But I've gotten into needle play and I felt like something's physical shift inside me. I just inhaled some capsaicin spit. I'm sorry, I'm trying to give this
You're great.
the thought that it deserves. It is, we approach that in the beginning of the book when we talk about, I talked to an acupuncturist who was also a pro-dom. And, the way in which the person on the experiencing end of the pain is in control of the situation is so powerful. And be that submitting to needles at acupuncture or getting spanked by a lover that you trust. There are all these ways that we can create a space for ourselves to explore sensations and experiences that perhaps have only ever been bad. But to do it in a way where we can stop at any time and we are in control of how far it goes and from a place of power. And I know that to be able to experience sensation that you asked for, whether or not it's attached to trauma, can do a lot for a person. I don't think that trauma is a prerequisite for masochism at all. Masochism is much too common, but so is trauma. And some people don't come to it from that perspective. But for a lot of people who do, it's a way to find a type of physical peace that might not feel attainable through other methods.
And I don't know if this was, I don't know if the person who submitted this question knows this, but there's also, I think probably one of my favorite chapters in the book kind of also addresses the kind of that slippery slope between like self-harm, right? And then other kinds of maybe more constructive harm or managed, or I should say self-harm versus pain experiences, right? And a lot of times those happen in BDSM and sometimes they happen in other contexts, but that kind of fuzzy gray area is of great interest to me, and I'm sure to a lot of other people. I thought it was really well done. I think that was probably my favorite chapter. So if you're considering getting the book because you're interested in those things, rest assured that that is really rigorously engaged with.
Yeah, that I put a lot into that chapter, the self-harm chapter. I have a history of just catastrophic self-harm, and one of the things that made me want to dig into this topic was the fact that I no longer am engaged in self-harm in that way. And I mean, I go to therapy a lot and have for a long time, and have kind of rebuilt a life absent the corrosive rage that led to my self-harm, but I still play with pain. And there is a slippery slope of motivation and desire and experience that so many people experience. You know, it's not uncommon to be on both sides of what is more benign masochism and what is more more considered canonical self-harm. And I think it's important to be curious about that particular slippery slope and to be able to talk about it without needing a definitive answer of where the line is exactly. Because I don't think there's just one line where like everything from here over is good masochism and everything from here over there is bad. Like that is a false dichotomy and it's not real. And you can't even, it's so interior, and it's so important for us to be able to think about ourselves with kindness and maybe absent the shame we were taught to bring to those discussions. I don't think that a life needs to be sanitized before it's engaged with critically. And I think if we wait for things to be perfect or to have all the answers before we start to do this work of asking unanswerable questions, then we miss out on so much experience and insight into ourselves. So it is messy to talk about, you know, where that line is and how we can find it. But I think that is one of the most important things in the book, is the exploration of how do we talk about the slippery slope.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it would be really nice if we lived in a world where, you know, somebody compulsively cutting themselves or cutting oneself because one in a self-destructive way was the same thing as playing with needles with your lover, because that would make life really easy, right? Like black and white, like, well, someone spilled blood, so that is bad, but the world is not like that. And avoiding that reality doesn't actually address any of the harms that can happen. We do have another question, actually. This one is from Arya. I experienced the chapter about extreme running as the goriest and most difficult to listen to, followed by a very cathartic chapter about your love. Was this sequence intentional to mirror the experience of pleasure following pain? It's a good question.
That's a good question. And yes, yeah, it was a deliberate succession. People bring so much of their own baggage and expectation to discussions of BDSM, and also discussions of athleticism. And I wanted to show that actually it's not necessary. I mean, like it can be as dark as you want, but it doesn't have to be. And, you know, there's this idea that the book was just going to be like the most salacious thing, the most intense thing was going to be the BDSM, because that's kind of what people bring to it. But like in reality, the most intense thing for me to watch was the ultra marathon. Like that brought up, I mean, that was so hard to watch because I was like, should I even be here? Should we be doing this? Like, I have very conflicted feelings about the field of ultra marathons, and a lot of them stem from the fact that I think it's often held up, that kind of athletic prowess is held up as like a good thing. It's just good. Wow, someone did that. That's amazing. But I think there's a lot to unpack there. And BDSM is often recoiled from, like, that has to be bad, that's abusive. And that's not true. I mean, obviously abuse can happen under the umbrella of BDSM or under the guise of it, but it's not, you know, doing high sensation play with a partner is not inherently bad. And in fact, I almost didn't get to go to the race because the person who runs it did not want to be associated with BDSM and considered what I was writing about to be abuse.
Wow.
And I just thought that, like, I wanted to show how far you could take it. And I also wanted to show how sweet it can be. I mean, and that was honestly the hardest thing to write for me, was to like show what a soft baby I really am. But yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that. That's really savvy.
Yeah, it's interesting too when talking about like what's normalized in terms of like physical limits, you know, like it's so bizarre that somebody who is hosting these ultras, maybe, you know, I don't have a whole lot of insight into their thought process, but they're more concerned about you attending than maybe what about somebody who's like coaches a professional football team, you know, or like, you know, there are all of these activities that we all do that, depending on the way that they're viewed within society, are taken to be completely, or, you know, are not interrogated to the extent that what it is that you're doing is. And maybe it's something, you know, as quote unquote low impact as a single 26 gauge needle into your skin versus somebody getting like massive brain trauma, you know, on the football field. Like, it's just, the other thing about having all of these different kind of like perspectives and pain experiences is that you also like I'm like you, like my kind of, you know, I feel like I see red flags around ultra sports as opposed to like SM, you know. It makes you go up against the stuff that makes you, even for people who are maybe thinking more about pain more often than other people, it's still I had all these opportunities to be like, oh, well, this makes me uncomfortable, you know, or, oh, this is kind of an edge for me. And it's amazing that way it can be so revealing, you know. Yeah, that was a great question.
I mean, that was a really insightful comment. Like, you know, what are we kind of told to just accept? What are we told not to be curious about? And what are we told it's like not okay to do? You know, a lot of it obviously I think is squeamishness about sex. But it is wild to me that there's like middle school football.
I know, right? Or
I mean, like
on TikTok, for some reason I keep my algorithm is like, you want to see 15-year-olds doing extreme cheerleading stunts, and I'm like, I can't even look, like they're all going to break their neck. You know,
I'm a big fan of athletic mediocrity.
Yeah, same. Another question just came in. Did you find anyone in your interviews who participated in both BDSM and more acceptable forms of masochism, like extreme sports? Was there a stark division between sexualized versus unsexualized masochism, or did you observe more overlap between these experiences?
A lot of overlap. A lot of, I mean, some people would just outright disclose that they were into sexual masochism and non-sexual masochism. A lot of people are into both, and some people, I don't know, because if they didn't disclose it, and I didn't feel like they wanted to go there, I would like kind of dance around it, give them an in, and then see. But like, I talked to hundreds of people about this, and oftentimes it was very rare to find someone who was only into one type of masochism only. They're out there, they're definitely out there, and I did talk to them, but like, I just feel like once you kind of start to play in that particular toolkit, curiosity takes over for some people. And you know, it depends on what they're willing to try and what they're willing to disclose to me. But I did see a lot of overlap, and I found that the tattoo piercing community and the sideshow community and the pepper eating community tended to be more forthcoming about their sexual proclivities with me, and that some of the athletes tended to not want that association made. But that was not my entire experience, and there were a lot of athletes who were just like, no, yeah, I'm into these really hard workouts, and then I do this in my free time, and I like it, and it's great, and it brings me a lot of joy. I'm happy to talk to you about it, that kind of thing. But I mean, honestly, it was so diverse. Like, you know, there were just so many different ways to play with your body's pain system, and so many different combinations of ways to try it.
Yeah,
I think I'm getting to the endorphin part of the hot sauce.
So how do you regularly eat that hot sauce? Like, do you like, or is it just kind of for special occasions?
This is not a food product for me. This is only the second time I've tried it. The first time I gargled it while Ashley Page, a dominatrix, you can find her online, she's great. They ate hot peppers. They ate Reaper peppers, and I gargled hot sauce, and then we got through it together for Green Apple Books in San Francisco. Oh, I can tell the endorphins are kicking in because I feel sweaty and sloppy. It's fun. It's like the hot sauce, I say, wears off, is like faster than the pepper itself. So like, I still feel the burn, but I'm not on a 40-minute rocket ship right now. Now I'm just kind of like, I feel stupid in a fun way.
There's another question, if you don't feel too stupid to answer it. I would love to know if the author discovered anything or changed any beliefs while researching. I like that.
That's good.
Paradigm shifts for you?
I mean, there were in practical and kind of philosophical ways. I knew what I was into wasn't rare. This whole project started out as a desire to figure out why I'm like this. I am a high sensation seeking masochist, and I have been for my whole life. And I went through, I was a ballet dancer, and then I left ballet and had so much trauma and had gone through so much abuse, and then didn't have anything else in my life, and just fell into a pit of despair and anger and fury and self-harm. And then I crawled out of it, and I still like pain. You know, healing my trauma did not change my desire to have these aversive experiences. And it made me really curious, like, what is it about me that makes me want to get punched in the face for fun? And as I began to research it and began to talk to people, it became apparent that like I really wasn't alone in my proclivities at all. And actually, masochistic behavior is really, really common. We have records of humans engaging in pain on purpose for about as long as we have records. And so what was such a wonderful thing for me, I mean, there was like a coming home to it, a realization that like, I'm not weird. I'm not that weird. I'm not alone in this. I mean, I am that weird, but like also there's the human experience in a body is messy and complicated. And we all have so many reasons for why we do what we do. And pain is so contextual. And digging into the science of that, and also, you know, people's lived experience of it really brought a sense of peace to me. The realization that like, it is just such a human thing to do. So that has felt great. And then to get to put my book out in the world and have people message me and be like, this book has helped me figure out something about myself. This book has made me feel like I'm not alone and that it's okay. That's all I'm really trying to do here. So that, if that answers your question.
I actually had another question that for you that came up for me while listening to these, but when we were talking about people who kind of balk at the idea of being identified with masochism or identifying as masochist, do you remember the first time that you were like, oh, that's me, like that's what I am? The first time where you were like, I am a masochist?
Yes. So I don't know. I didn't really have the language. I knew I'd heard, I was familiar with the term masochist. And because it gets tossed around in ballet a lot. And so I knew from my instructors that in order to pursue this career, there had to be this thing in you that could suffer and like it. And so when I was like middle school age and got my first pair of point shoes, I'd never stood up in a pair of point shoes before. And I did, and it was the most painful thing I'd done that like up until that point, besides like some childhood injuries that don't really count because of the way injuries happen. And I stood up in those point shoes and I felt like shit, like real fucking shit. I felt like I wanted to scream and cry and never do it again. And I just felt like I still wanted to. And that was the first moment where I was like, I am like one of those people. I can be one of those people. And then, you know, later on, you know, realizing that sexual masochism came pretty easily to me, but I was like definitely shunned for even mentioning wanting stuff like that, you know, and I was in my late teens and kind of exploring that. And so I shelved it for a while. But like, I guess that first moment of really just being like, I always wondered if I was one of those people. And then I got my point shoes and I was like, I am.
You're like, it's true.
I am one of those people. But I'd already been dancing for like 8 years or something. And it was really hard. And so it just kind of seemed like I think about like how much I wanted this thing and how much I was willing to let it define me as a child. And how even after I left it, I took with me my like resilience fetish and my endurance fetish and all of these things that now bring me a lot of joy in my life. And it's so nice to be able to do that. I don't know. I like a playground. I am a playground.
If it's not for playing, then what's it for?
Right? We're all gonna die.
We don't have any more questions. It's your last chance, I guess.
Oh, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Before we go, I would like to hear about your forthcoming book, if you would like to share any of that. I know you have a book coming out next year, and I'm such a fan of your work. We really didn't get to talk about it, but like this book is phenomenal. The Earthquake Room. I've gotten so many people to read it because what you do is amazing, Davey. And I just want to say I'm a huge fan, and I would love to hear about what you have coming up.
Well, the funny thing about it is, first of all, thank you. I love that little book, but it's a very different book from my new book, which is actually explicitly about SM and about pain, but especially from a person who, unlike you and the capsaicin thing, where you came to it with this understanding of yourself as like a masochist, and we were able to integrate that. But my second book, which is called X and is coming out June of next year from Catapult, is about a person who suddenly realizes, because of a transcendent life-changing experience, that they actually want to experience pain. But the elevator pitch is that it's about a femdom nightmare. So people if you're into SM and gay shit, you should look into X.
I'm so excited to read it. So excited.
Cool. Yeah, and perhaps that's as good a place as any to wrap up tonight. My gosh, thank you both so much, Davey and Leigh, for this event. It has been a lot of fun. I did not know that there was going to be hot pepper eating during the event tonight, and it was a lot of fun to watch that happen. And Davey, thank you for all the insight that you brought and holding the space during those kind of turbulent times when Leigh was first experiencing what was happening. And yeah, would love to reach out. Maybe we can all get back together again in June of next year when your book comes out, Davey, and we can have another conversation. So yeah, and thank you to everyone in the audience who showed up tonight. And brought really, really good, engaging questions. The links to all the books and Firestorm and our community calendar and all that is in the chat. So please make sure to check that out. Leigh's book is Hurt So Good, which we heard a really awesome and entertaining excerpt from tonight. Davey's book is The Earthquake Room, which is also available at Firestorm, so check it out. Anybody who signed up and registered for this event tonight will get a follow-up email with a recording of the event so you can experience it again in your own time. So yeah, thank you so much, Davey and Leigh, for being here tonight and offering us this really wonderful event.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Leigh.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. Have a good night.
Good night.
Goodbye now.